I froze mid-step, the words replaying in my head like a punch I hadn't seen coming. Try not to embarrass me. These people are way above your level. He didn't even flinch after saying it. Just that sharp, arrogant smirk that always made my skin crawl. The man speaking was Rohail, my fiancé, or at least, that's what everyone thought. To the world, we were a perfect couple, polished, charming, admired. But behind closed doors, he thrived on subtle cruelty, always testing the boundaries of my patience and pride. I am Myra, and for months, I had brushed off his little digs as insecurity, teasing, even humor. But this was different. A public warning, a blatant assertion of superiority, delivered in front of his colleagues and my extended family at a fundraising gala in the city's grandest hotel. I smiled politely, nodding as he leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting me to falter. Around us, the room glittered with chandeliers, expensive suits, and champagne flutes. People laughed at jokes I barely understood, spoke in names I barely recognized. I could feel Rohail's eyes on me, cold and calculating, daring me to fail. I didn't. I adjusted my posture, kept my smile intact, and sipped my drink slowly, listening and observing. Every word, every glance from the so-called elite around us became a data point. I was small, yes, according to him, but observant. And that, he would soon realize, was far more dangerous. As the night unfolded, his friends and colleagues chatted with him animatedly, oblivious to the tension between us. I laughed when appropriate, contributed where necessary, and, most importantly, refused to be diminished. Each polite response, each confident nod, was a quiet rebellion. I could see it in the slight flicker of his eye, the first sign that his assumed control might not be so absolute. Yet, beneath my calm exterior, unease lingered. This wasn't just about a single insult or a single gala. Rohail had a history of subtle humiliation, carefully planting seeds of doubt and fear, only to watch them grow in silence. I had tolerated it for too long, but the sharpness of this remark, delivered in public, cut differently. As I watched him talk to the others, I realized something chilling. He didn't just underestimate me, he thought he had already won. And people like him always make mistakes when they believe the game is over. Tonight, I didn't embarrass him, but I also didn't forgive him. And deep down, a plan was already forming. Because those who belittle others in the name of superiority rarely notice the quiet storm brewing right under their smug smiles, the gala ended, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me long after the chandeliers dimmed and the guests filtered out. I should have felt relief, yet every polite smile Rohail gave me felt like a mask hiding something darker. It started subtly. A few days after the event, I noticed he would answer calls in private, stepping into another room or outside, his tone suddenly hushed. Sometimes he'd leave his phone face down on the table, but the way he flinched when I glanced at it told me he was hiding something. Favoritism emerged next. When we went out to dinner with friends, Rohail would praise certain people excessively, friends from his corporate circle, colleagues, even strangers who impressed him. His comments were small but calculated, the kind that made me feel invisible, like my presence was barely acknowledged. I tried not to overthink it, but every compliment he withheld from me felt like another tiny sting. Then came the financial oddities. He would casually mention shared expenses, dinners, events, even investments we had discussed, but when I checked accounts or receipts, things didn't add up. Small amounts were missing, misreported, or attributed vaguely to other purposes. When I confronted him, he'd brush it off with a smile. "It's nothing, don't worry. I'll take care of it later." But the pattern repeated, and the later never came. The emotional strain was relentless. Each day I felt myself questioning my judgment, replaying every interaction to see if I had misread him. His subtle digs, about my career, my family, my level, echoed in my mind. I loved him, or at least I thought I did, but the cracks in his facade were growing, and I was noticing them in ways I hadn't before. One night, I overheard him talking on the phone in the next room, whispering urgently, "She suspects nothing. Keep everything on track until it's too late." My stomach sank. Had I misjudged the man I trusted? Or had his arrogance blinded him to the fact that I wasn't as naive as he believed? I tried to convince myself it was paranoia. Maybe he was just protective, maybe it was work stress, maybe the numbers would make sense later. But the unease clung to me, tightening like a noose. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The person who had told me not to embarrass him, someone who thought himself untouchable among the elite, was hiding something I couldn't yet see. The betrayal hadn't arrived yet. But the red flags were lining up, and I could feel the storm approaching. For now, I endured, quietly, observing, collecting pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet fully understand. Because if Rohale thought I was weak, he had another thing coming, and never expected the truth to hit me like a thunderclap. It wasn't whispered rumors or vague suspicions anymore, it was undeniable. I discovered it by accident, scrolling through a shared account we had set up for wedding planning. A series of transfers caught my eye, large sums disappearing, routed through accounts I didn't recognize. Confused, I dug deeper, cross-referencing receipts, invoices, and emails. And then it became horrifyingly clear, Rohale had been siphoning money from our shared wedding fund, and from my personal savings, for months. The more I uncovered, the more deliberate it became. He had falsified receipts, manipulated vendors, and even convinced mutual friends to help cover up inconsistencies. Every excuse he had given me, every casual brush-off about later or mistakes, had been a calculated lie. The gala insult, the claim that I was below his level, wasn't just arrogance. It was a warning, a test to see if I would notice, if I would question, if I could challenge him. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Heartbreak washed over me, sharp and bitter, but it was quickly replaced by a searing rage. How could the man I trusted, the one I had planned my life with, betray me like this? How could he smile, act charming, and speak to everyone with that smug confidence, while secretly dismantling my life behind my back? I felt disbelief first. No, it can't be true. Maybe I'm misreading this. But the numbers didn't lie. The emails didn't lie. His calculated manipulation, the quiet exclusion, the favoritism, it all fit together now, a puzzle I wished I hadn't solved. Then came the fire. Anger so sharp it almost burned through my chest. I had been played, mocked, and underestimated. He had counted on my compliance, my trust, my silence. And he had miscalculated. I wasn't naive. I wasn't powerless. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The tears came for a moment, not for him, not even for the stolen money, but for the betrayal itself. The raw, personal, intimate violation of trust. But as quickly as the tears came, they were replaced by clarity. I had proof. Every fraudulent transfer, every manipulated document, every hidden conversation was a weapon. And I realized something vital. Rohale had underestimated me. He thought I would crumble silently, let him get away with it, and continue playing his charade of superiority. He thought I would stay below his level. But I had other plans. A slow, deliberate resolve began to form in my mind. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about making sure he, and everyone who believed his lies, understood the full measure of betrayal and consequence. And in that moment, heartbreak transformed into determination. He had tested me. And now, it was my turn. The storm was coming. And I was going to make sure Rohale felt every drop that night. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by statements, screenshots, and emails. The evidence glared at me like a silent army, proof of deception, manipulation, and theft. My chest ached with betrayal, but the grief soon gave way to something fiercer, clarity. I realized I had been reacting emotionally for far too long, letting Rohale's arrogance dictate my feelings, my confidence, my self-worth. The words he had thrown at me, the humiliation at the gala, the constant subtle put-downs, had left scars. But scars can heal. And sometimes, scars are the sparks that ignite strength. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. One truth crystallized in my mind: I couldn't rely on anyone else to correct this. Not his friends, not my family, not fate itself. The responsibility to reclaim my life, my money, and my dignity rested squarely on my shoulders. The moment of transformation came unexpectedly. I was scrolling through old photos, remembering how I had trusted him, confided in him, loved him without reservation. And I felt it, the quiet fury of someone who has been underestimated one time too many. A voice inside me whispered, clear and unwavering, "He thinks I am below his level. Let's show him what happens when you underestimate the person you betray." I stood up. The tears that had come in waves during the first shock of betrayal were gone. In their place was a deliberate, controlled focus. I was no longer the hurt, humiliated woman at the gala. I was a strategist, a planner, someone who could wield the evidence I had gathered like a sword. Every lie he had told, every transfer he had made, every moment of subtle humiliation, it could all be used to expose him, dismantle his arrogance, and ensure he paid the price. I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began outlining a plan: secure final proof, consult a lawyer, document everything meticulously, and wait for the right moment to strike. Patience would be my weapon. Timing would be my advantage. And most importantly, I realized I would not act out of anger. I would act with precision. Every step calculated, every move deliberate. The emotional storm that had clouded my judgment was now a tool, focused into strategic determination. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not lightly, not timidly, but with quiet assurance. Rohale had thought he was in control. He had thought I would crumble, that I would accept my place beneath him. He had miscalculated. And from that moment on, I promised myself something: betrayal would not break me. It would forge me into someone unstoppable. The hurt would fuel me. The deception would sharpen me. And when the time came, Rohale would realize the grave mistake he had made in dismissing me. Because now, I was no longer a victim. I was a storm waiting to strike. I didn't rush. That was the first rule. Rohale thrived on impulse, mine would be patience. Step 1 was proof, undeniable and airtight. I backed up every bank statement, every transfer receipt, every altered invoice. I printed copies and stored digital versions in multiple places: cloud storage, encrypted drives, even a folder I left with a trusted friend. If he tried to erase anything, I wanted a trail that led straight back to him. Step 2 was confirmation. I quietly contacted 2 vendors from our wedding planning list, posing as someone finalizing payments. What they told me made my stomach twist. Rohale had instructed them to send invoices directly to him, then charged me inflated amounts. One vendor hesitated, then admitted he'd been told I was bad with money and preferred not to be involved. I thanked him calmly, hung up, and wrote everything down. Dates. Names. Words. Details win wars. Step 3 was leverage. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, quietly, discreetly. No drama. Just facts. The lawyer didn't raise an eyebrow when I laid everything out. That alone told me how serious this was. Fraud. Misrepresentation. Financial abuse. I walked out with clarity and options, and with the knowledge that time was now on my side. Meanwhile, Rohale felt completely untouchable. He continued planning the wedding as if nothing had changed, casually reminding me of guest lists, venues, and appearances we needed to maintain. He spoke about the upcoming engagement dinner with his influential friends, the same people who had looked down on me at the gala. And that's when the final piece clicked into place. Step 4. Timing. I let him believe I was still compliant, still unaware. I nodded when he talked. I smiled when he corrected me. I even apologized once, just to see how easily he accepted it. He didn't question a thing. In his mind, I was still below his level. Still controllable. Behind the scenes, I set the trap. I encouraged him to handle all financial explanations at the engagement dinner, knowing how much he loved showing off. I forwarded him a few carefully chosen emails, real ones, but incomplete, so he'd feel confident. Overconfident people make mistakes publicly. At night, when the apartment was quiet, doubt sometimes crept in. What if this backfires? What if he finds out? But then I'd remember his words. His smirk. The way he'd warned me not to embarrass him. And I'd steady myself. This wasn't about revenge for pride alone. This was about accountability. About reclaiming what he thought he could steal without consequence. By the time everything was in place, my heart wasn't racing anymore. It was calm. Focused. Ready. Rohale still believed he was in control. He still believed I was harmless. And that belief was the most dangerous lie of all. The engagement dinner was everything Rohale loved, luxurious, exclusive, and carefully curated to impress the people he believed were above my level. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, servers moved like clockwork, and every guest wore success like perfume. Rohale stood at the center of it all, confident, polished, untouchable. And utterly unprepared. Halfway through dinner, his father clinked a glass and announced that Rohale would say a few words about our journey and the wedding plans. Rohale rose easily, straightening his jacket, flashing that familiar smile. He spoke about ambition, partnerships, and trust, each word landing like irony wrapped in silk. Then he turned to me. "This wouldn't be possible without Myra," he said smoothly. "She's learning quickly." Learning. That was my cue. I stood, calm and steady, and smiled back. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "since we're talking about trust and finances, I think everyone deserves clarity." The room stilled. Rohale's smile faltered, just for a second. I connected my phone to the screen behind us. Bank statements appeared. Dates. Amounts. Vendor invoices, side by side with altered versions. Gasps rippled through the room. I spoke calmly, methodically, like someone presenting a case she already knew she'd won. "These transfers," I continued, "were taken from my personal savings and our shared wedding fund. Without my consent. Over several months." Rohale stepped forward, voice sharp. "This is inappropriate. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at him, then really looked at him. "No," I said quietly. "This is exactly appropriate." A lawyer stood from the back of the room. "My lawyer." He introduced himself, then explained the evidence, the fraud, the misrepresentation. Rohale's mother went pale. His father demanded answers. The same people who once nodded approvingly at Rohale now stared at him with open disbelief. Phones came out. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs into judgment. Rohale tried to speak, but words failed him. For the first time, he looked small. Cornered. Exposed. Security was called, not for me. For him. The venue manager apologized to me. Vendors stepped forward, confirming my claims. Each voice was another nail sealing his collapse. As he was escorted out, Rohale turned back, desperation flashing across his face. "You didn't have to destroy me," he hissed. I met his gaze, unshaken. "You did that yourself," I said. "I just stopped protecting you." The room was silent as the doors closed behind him. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't caused a scene. I hadn't embarrassed him. I had revealed him. And in a room full of people he desperately wanted to impress, his illusion of superiority shattered, publicly, permanently, and beyond repair. The days that followed were surreal. Social media buzzed with whispers of what had happened at the engagement dinner. Friends who once praised Rohail's charm now spoke in hushed tones about deceit and arrogance. Even his closest allies had turned away, unwilling to defend a man whose carefully constructed image had collapsed in front of everyone he wanted to impress. For me, the aftermath was quiet, yet exhilarating. I had reclaimed my financial security, exposed the lies, and most importantly, reclaimed my dignity. The sense of relief was profound. I no longer carried the weight of manipulation, humiliation, and betrayal. Every sleepless night and anxious moment had transformed into strategy, and strategy into justice. Friends and family reached out with support, admiration, and shock. I knew something felt off, they admitted, but we never imagined the truth. Their words mattered, but more than that, I felt a deep, unshakable confidence in myself. The woman Rohail tried to dismiss as below his level was now unstoppable, respected, capable, and wise to the tactics of those who seek to undermine her. The poetic justice was undeniable. The man who had warned me not to embarrass him had been undone by the very traits he thought made him superior. Charm, manipulation, and arrogance could only carry someone so far, and when underestimated, even the most polished facade can crumble. I often replay that night in my mind, the tension, the calm, the quiet satisfaction of watching truth and integrity reveal themselves publicly. It wasn't revenge for anger's sake, it was restoration, a reminder that betrayal carries consequences. To anyone watching this story, have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted? Felt the sting of betrayal so sharp it cut through every doubt you had about yourself? I want you to know something: there's power in clarity, in patience, and in trusting your instincts. If you've faced deceit, leave a comment and share your story. Subscribe to this channel so we can explore more stories where resilience turns the tables, because every betrayal hides a lesson in strength. And here's the line that still gives me chills. The man who thought I would never rise above his cruelty spent his entire life proving one thing: underestimating a quiet storm only ensures that when it strikes, it leaves no stone unturned. Rohail underestimated me. I never underestimated myself. And that was the difference between who broke and who stood victorious.